know this too, because one will often see ads that quote from the New York Times Book Review. It'll be a line of praise. It will say New York Times Book Review, and it won't say the reviewer was someone who seems hugely consequential to us. It's because most readers don't look at it that way, and I say more power to them. You know, here we live in what Roth calls the egosphere, and each one of us carries his own with him or her. I think readers, in their way, know better. And so that's good. I think it also keeps us from taking ourselves too seriously. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. A couple of our panelists have to go. It's a little bit past 12:30. Some of them can stay. I'm sure some of you can stay. Let's take a little break for just a minute. Anybody who needs to go, please go. And then the rest of us can keep talking. And I want to open up to questions, conversation from the audience. So, and we have a microphone in the audience. So please say who you are and direct your questions to somebody in particular. And our first question is...
Hi, my name is Lizzie Skornick, and I'm a freelance reviewer. And I'm glad the three of you are left on the panel because I think you had the most interesting things to say about this topic. But
you would have said that about any three.
Well, I was interested on the question of reviewing one's friends and enemies because it seems like the reader actually has a very different perspective than what the three of you as reviewers would say. And that I think your average reader, the worry when a friend or enemy is reviewed, obviously, is the question of influence. But it seems like what you're saying and what we saw in Christopher Hitchens' story is that it's not a question of not seeing the book clearly. It's a question of whether or not you might want to publish the review. It seemed like what Christopher was saying was not that he couldn't see the book of his enemy clearly, but that he was galled by the fact that he liked the book. Is that the case? Do you really think there's no question of actual influence? And if there is a question of influence, is that a bad thing?
Can I answer that? Well, first of all, I just have to say that I don't really understand what clearly means in this situation. I mean, because there's so many... To make it a question of whether you know the reviewer, whether you know the author, there's so many other factors. I mean, for example, the two most positive reviews that I've written recently for the Times Book Review. One was a book that I read while I was waiting in a doctor's office, endless waits I'd broken my arm. And the other was a book that I'd read on a transatlantic airplane flight. Now, those are situations in which I'm grateful for distraction. I have I'll pretty much love and in fact, I love those books. I mean, I've since looked at the books. I was right to love them. But when the assigning editor called me, should I have said, you know where I read those books? I was in a doctor's office and an airplane flight. I mean, so much influences one's judgment that the question of our acquaintance with the writer is only a little tiny percentage of that. So again, the whole question of objectivity seems odd to me because it's opinion. It's just one's taste, one's mood, as John said, one's moment in life. All those things factor in.
Other question? Yeah, back there.
Hi, I'm Levi Asher, here as a blogger. Favoritism is only one ethical issue. I actually had hoped to direct this to Sam Tannenhouse. I remember when Henry Kissinger reviewed a book about Dean Acheson, and I think I was not alone in feeling it was a sort of thinly veiled defense of his own career as Secretary of State. And is that another form? This self-serving review is that another form of ethical consideration?
Yes. I think that gets back to what John was saying about performance art reviewing. And I think that's not just true in the case of someone like Kissinger. It also has to do with any reviewer who has an axe to grind that's not generated by the book under review. I mean, maybe the book under review gives you an axe to grind, pro or con, but not. But I'm not interested in a reviewer who comes in with a soapbox and then stands on it and uses the book as an excuse to wax philosophical or otherwise about a variety of subjects.
You have to do think this way though. If you're a journalistic enterprise such as the Times Book Review, you want to raise some eyebrows, stir some crap do all of this and that. Every once in a while, it seems to me to be journalistically justifiable to throw something like this out. I'm not going to pick up Henry Kissinger and say, oh, boy, Henry Kissinger, I really want to know what he thinks about whatever it is. I know what he thinks, and he thinks only about Henry Kissinger. In fact, I left the New York Times back in 1983 after when I was the daily book critic because they'd started vetting my newspaper reviews politically, and a particular example was Henry Kissinger's memoirs. They held it for a week. I went to every editor in the place, and I basically just, he said, and I have to say this is off the subject, but Henry Kissinger in his first volume of memoirs wrote that he'd spent one sleepless night in all his years in public service, and that was the evening before his secret visit to China when they were opening up the channel to China. And my crime, so far as the New York Times was concerned, was to suggest that he should have spent many more sleepless nights. But Kissinger, every once in a while you want to get. I mean, I remember back in my day, you get Eugene McCarthy. Well, you were going to get Eugene McCarthy being disdainful of everybody else, but you were going to get people to read it, and that was just showbiz.
John, before we go to the next question, can you just explain what you mean by performance art criticism? Because I've always loved your reviewing, and I think of you as a performance art critic. I mean, of every 10 metaphors in one of your sentences, I think 8 absolutely soar, and that's the highest percentage I know of anybody. But do you mean instead of telling people what the book is about and giving them your experience of the book, so the book disappears?
I have never, like you, and I read the reviews that show up on the online that you write, Carlin. You always make it a point to quote the writer you're reviewing. You always make it a point. We always try to. Sure, the metaphors that I use or you use should somehow come out of the metaphors that we've been exposed to by the book. You begin to think like the if you admire the writer, like the writer, so that it's suggestive, and they ought to be in the service of the book. The best in the business ever for doing this was Isaiah Berlin, where he sometimes couldn't tell when he was writing about Herzen or something like that, where Herzen stopped and Berlin took over. This gives a kind of momentum to the review, and also persuasiveness to the review. I'm not saying that you shouldn't write well when you write. I'm saying that it should not be at the expense of the writer and the book that you're reviewing. That everybody sees only you, and not the writer, because quite frankly, it is a parasitic business, reviewing. Without the genius, we are nothing. We are nothing, but we are riding that genius. We are symbiotic on it. And somebody had to do a lot of work so that we do less amount of work. We find our honor in various ways, which we've discussed at this panel. But let's not misunderstand where the importance is. The importance and the responsibility to the reader and to the writer is to make sure that we keep who's first.
Thanks. Yeah, we have a question in the back.
Yeah, I first of all want to know about negative reviews. To me, as a reader, they're more enjoyable to read. My sense is that they may sell more papers for you. But on the flip side, what about the publishing advertisers? What kind of pressure might you get for the reviews not to be quite so negative? So if you could talk to both those sides.
Well, since publishers don't advertise in regional book review sections, I feel absolutely no pressure whatsoever. I wouldn't if they, I believe in the church-state wall. I want it as high as possible. I don't talk to the advertising side. I'm sure they're perfectly nice. But I wouldn't know, and I don't want to know. So it's an irrelevant question. I think if you're thinking about advertising when you're assigning or editing reviews, then you should get another job.
Did you want to speak to that? Anybody? No? Or else we'll go to the next question. John in the back, and then maybe up here in the front.
I had a question. What happens when a hit piece is written and you're not sure that it's a hit piece and it runs and the damage is done? This is a question basically, I guess, for John and for Carlin. David and Carlin and John. When something has happened and you're not sure that it has an